The LESHY'S Law. Part 1. The First Body. They found the first body on the morning after Cupola night, when the forest was still drunk on ritual and the ashes of solstice fires smouldered in the clearings. Detective Inspector Mara Kowalska stood at the edge of the Białowieża Forest, Poland's last primeval woodland, and studied the corpse suspended 15 meters above the ground. The victim, a young man, maybe 25, hung upside down from an ancient oak, his body wrapped in living vines that pulsed with an unnatural green phosphorescence. "Jack Dlugo?" she asked the medical examiner. "How long?" Dr. Piotr Mazur squinted through his glasses at the body. "Hard to say precisely. Maybe 12 hours. But Mara..." He hesitated. "The vines. They're growing into him, through his mouth, nose, ears. And they're still alive." Mara had been with the Podlaskie Provincial Police for 15 years. She'd seen overdoses, domestic murders, accidents that looked like art installations. But this was something else. "We need to get him down," she said. "The fire brigade is on the way, but..." Mazur gestured helplessly at the vines. "They're too thick to cut with normal tools. And the tree, Mara, that oak is protected. It's over 800 years old. We can't just..." "I don't care if it's 1,000 years old," Mara snapped. "There's a dead man in it. Get him down." But as the fire brigade arrived with their equipment, something strange happened. The moment the chainsaw touched the vines, they recoiled, withdrawing into the forest canopy like startled snakes. The body dropped, and Mara's officers caught it in a tarp they'd hastily spread below. Up close, it was worse. The victim's skin had taken on a greenish tinge, and his eyes, still open, were the color of moss. His fingernails had elongated into something like thorns, and when Mazur opened the body bag to begin his preliminary examination, roots spilled out from the young man's mouth like a scream made of wood. "Bows," Mazur whispered. "God." Mara pulled out her notebook, forcing herself into the familiar routine of investigation. "ID." One of her officers, young Tomasz Gorski, held up a waterlogged wallet. "Jakub Wrobel, age 24. Student at University of Warsaw." According to his phone, he was here for the Cupola night celebrations with friends. Cupola night. The pagan midsummer festival that had been celebrated in these woods since before Christianity reached Poland. Officially, it was a cultural heritage event now. Folk dancing, flower wreaths, jumping over bonfires. Unofficially, it attracted neo-pagans, folklorists, and a concerning number of people who took the old beliefs very seriously. "Find his friends," Mara ordered. "I want to know everything about last night. Every person he spoke to, every ritual he participated in, everything." As her team dispersed, Mara stayed behind, studying the ancient oak. Its bark was carved with symbols, old ones worn by centuries of weather, but recently refreshed. She recognized some from her grandmother's stories, signs of protection, of boundaries, of things best left alone. And there, barely visible in the morning light, a message carved in fresh wood. "PRAWO LASU," the law of the forest. Mara drove back to the station in Białystok, her mind churning. She'd grown up near these woods, heard the stories from her babcia, her grandmother, who still lived in a small village on the forest's edge. Stories about the Leshy, the forest guardian, a spirit that appeared as an old man, or a wolf, or a walking tree. Stories about people who violated the forest's laws and were never seen again. But those were just stories. Folklore. Superstition. Weren't they? Her phone rang. "Tomasz." "We found the friends," he said, his voice tight. "3 of them. They're at the local hospital." "Mara, they're not well." "What do you mean?" You need to see this yourself. 20 minutes later, Mara stood in a hospital room looking at 3 university students who seemed to be turning into plants. The first, a young woman named Zofia, had moss growing in her hair. Actual moss, rooted to her scalp, spreading down her neck. She sat catatonic, staring at nothing, occasionally whispering words in a language Mara didn't recognize. The second, a man called Dominic, had bark-like patches spreading across his skin. He was more responsive, but clearly terrified. "We didn't know," he kept saying. "We thought it was just a game. Just old traditions. We didn't know the forest would answer." "What did you do?" Mara asked gently. Dominic's hands shook. "The ritual. The one from the old book Jakub found. He was studying folklore, you see. He found this manuscript in the university archives. Instructions for a cupola night ceremony that supposedly could grant wishes. Commune with the old spirits." "What kind of spirits?" "The leshy. The forest guardian. We thought it was just mythology. We were drunk, and it was cupola night, and the forest felt so alive." He started crying. "We performed the ritual. We made offerings. We asked for things. And the forest listened." The third student, Anya, hadn't spoken at all. Her eyes had turned entirely green, like leaves in sunlight, and small flowers grew from her fingertips. She was sedated, restrained to the bed, because twice she tried to walk out of the hospital toward the forest. "What did you ask for?" Mara pressed. Dominic wiped his eyes. Jakub asked to understand the forest. To really understand it, the way the old people did. To know its secrets. He laughed bitterly. "I guess he got his wish." The rest of the day was spent in the mechanical routine of investigation. Mara interviewed the hospital staff, reviewed security footage, collected statements. But the facts kept leading her back to the impossible. 3 university students were transforming into plants. One was already dead, merged with a tree. And the physical evidence, the vines, the transformation, the carved message, defied every natural law she knew. By evening, she had the students' full story. They'd found the ritual in the university's special collections, a manuscript dating to the 15th century, written by a monk who documented pagan practices before they were fully suppressed by the church. The ritual was titled "A Supplication to the Lord of the Greenwood," and promised communion with the forest spirit. Tomasz had pulled the manuscript from the archives. It was written in Old Church Slavonic mixed with vernacular Polish, full of arcane symbols and warnings that the students had apparently ignored. The ritual required specific offerings: bread made from grain grown in forest soil, water from a spring that had never been touched by human hands, and blood from each participant. They were supposed to speak the words at midnight on cupola night, in a place where no church bell had ever been heard. They'd done it perfectly. And the forest had answered. "Boss," Tomasz said, his voice uncertain, "I know how this sounds, but what if it's real? What if the old stories are true?" Mara looked at her young officer. He'd grown up in the city, educated in secular schools, trained in modern police methods. But she could see the doubt in his eyes, the same doubt growing in her own mind. "Whether it's real or not," she said carefully, "people are dying. We need to find a way to stop it." How do you stop a forest? It was a good question, one that kept Mara awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her apartment, thinking about her childhood. She'd grown up hearing the stories. Every child in the region did. Her babcia would tell them on winter evenings, when the forest was dark and full of wolves. Stories about the leshy who could appear as a peasant asking for directions, or as a giant whose head touched the clouds. about how he could lead you in circles until you died of exhaustion, or guide you safely home if you showed proper respect. About the rules: never whistle in the forest, never call out names, always leave offerings, and never, ever take more than you need. Mara had dismissed them as folklore, charming relics of a superstitious past. But what if they weren't? Part 2. The Old Ways. Mara needed answers, and there was only one person she knew who might have them. Her grandmother's cottage sat on the very edge of the forest, a small wooden structure that looked like it had grown from the earth itself. Białowieża Kowalska was 93 years old, sharp as a thorn, and the unofficial keeper of the village's old knowledge. "Wiedzielem ze Presidzius," the old woman said as Mara approached. "I knew you would come." She was sitting outside, shelling peas, her gnarled fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Around her neck hung a dozen charms: rowan wood, iron nails, braided herbs. Protection. "Babciu," Mara said, kissing her grandmother's weathered cheek. "I need to ask you about the Leshy." The old woman's hands stilled. "You found someone in the forest." It wasn't a question. "A body, wrapped in vines. 3 others are sick, changing. They performed a ritual on Cupola night." Białowieża made a sign against evil. "Glupsy. Fools. You don't play with the old powers. Especially not in Białowieża. That forest remembers when the world was young." "Is it real?" Mara asked, hating how her voice shook. "The Leshy? Is it real?" Her grandmother looked at her with eyes that had seen the Nazis, the Soviets, the fall of communism, and remained unimpressed by all of them. "Real? What is real, Marzenko?" "The forest is real. The trees that have stood for 1,000 years are real. The laws that govern these lands before churches and courts, those are real too. We just forgot them, pretended they were stories. But a spirit that kills people." "The Leshy doesn't kill," Białowieża interrupted. "The Leshy enforces. There are rules in the forest. Old rules. Don't take without giving. Don't hunt without need. Don't break what you can't repair. And never, ever, demand what you haven't earned." She resumed shelling peas, each snap of the pods punctuating her words. "These students, they took a sacred night and treated it like a game. They demanded gifts from the forest without understanding the price. The Leshy answered. It always answers. But it answers according to the old laws, not our modern ideas of mercy. How do I stop it?" "Stop it." Białowieża laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "You don't stop the Leshy, child. You negotiate. You make things right. You restore balance." "How?" The old woman stood, her back straight despite her years. "Come. I'll show you what your investigation won't find in any police manual." She led Mara inside the cottage, to a locked chest in the corner. From it she pulled an ancient book, not printed, but handwritten on thick parchment, bound in leather that might have been tree bark. "Your great-great-grandmother was a septucher," Białowieża said. "A whisperer, a folk healer, someone who knew the old magic. This was hers, and her mother's before that. I was going to give it to you when I died, but it seems the forest has other plans." Mara took the book carefully. The pages smelled of earth and smoke and something green and growing. Inside were recipes for healing potions, protection charms, instructions for birth and death rites, and a section titled, "Dealing with the Leshy." "Read it," Białowieża said. "Understand it. Then decide if you want to solve this case like a police detective or like someone who knows the truth." Mara spent the night reading. According to the book, the Leshy was neither good nor evil. It was law incarnate. the living embodiment of the forest's will. It could appear in many forms: an old man in peasant clothes, a wolf with human eyes, a tree that walked, a wind that spoke. It protected the forest and all creatures in it. It rewarded those who respected the old ways, and it punished, harshly, those who violated them. The punishments were specific. Those who hunted without permission became the hunted. Those who cut trees carelessly were bound to them. Those who took the forest's gifts without offering in return were claimed as payment. Those who demanded knowledge without wisdom were given understanding they couldn't bear. Jakub had asked to understand the forest. So the forest had made him part of itself, filled him with its knowledge until he was no longer human but wood and leaf and root. The others had asked for things too, according to Dominic. Zofia had asked for beauty, and the forest had given her the beauty of wildflowers and moss. Anya had asked to never feel lonely again, and now she heard the voice of every tree, every plant, the entire forest singing to her endlessly. Dominic claimed he'd asked for nothing. That's probably why he'd been affected the least. But the book said something that chilled Mara. Even witnessing the ritual without intervening is complicity. The forest sees all. There was a section on how to negotiate with the Leshy, but it was complex, requiring specific offerings at specific times. And it was dangerous. The Leshy didn't suffer fools, and going before it was to put yourself under its judgment. Mara closed the book and looked out the window at the forest, dark and vast and older than memory. She had a choice. She could pursue this like a normal investigation, find rational explanations, blame it on drugs or mass hysteria or environmental toxins, file a report, move on. Or she could accept that some laws were older than the ones she'd sworn to uphold. Her phone buzzed. Tomasz. Boss, we found something. Another body. Part 3. The second victim. The call came at 6 a.m., pulling Mara from uneasy dreams where trees spoke in her grandmother's voice. Boss, you need to see this. Tomasz's voice was shaken. It's Adamczyk. Piotr Adamczyk. He's... Christ, I don't even know how to describe it. Mara was already pulling on her clothes. Where? His logging yard. Just outside town. Boss, it's like the student, but worse. Much worse. She drove through the pre-dawn darkness, her mind racing. Piotr Adamczyk. She knew the name, knew the reputation. A man who'd built his fortune on timber, who saw the forest as resource rather than heritage. He'd been lobbying hard to change the protected status of certain sections of Białowieża, arguing that modern forestry was sustainable, that Poland needed the jobs and revenue. Environmental groups hated him. The European Union had blocked several of his permits. But he kept pushing, kept finding legal loopholes, kept cutting where he thought he could get away with it. If the Leshy was real, if it truly enforced the forest's law, then Adamczyk would be high on its list. The logging yard was chaos when she arrived. Police cars, ambulance, fire truck, and in the center, surrounded by stacks of cut timber, stood something that had once been a man. This one was worse. The body was Adamczyk's, but transformed in a way that made the student's death look merciful. Mara approached slowly, forcing herself to study the details with a detective's eye, even though every instinct screamed to look away. They found him in his own logging yard, surrounded by piles of cut timber. But Adamczyk himself had become a tree, or something like one. His body stood upright, feet merged into roots that had broken through the concrete, arms raised and branching into limbs heavy with leaves. His face was barely recognizable, bark growing over his features, but his mouth was open in a scream that had been silenced by the wood growing from his throat, and carved into his chest, in letters that wept sap. PRAWO LASU. The law of the forest. Jesus Christ, Tomosh breathed. Get Dr. Mazur, Mara said quietly, and call the Environmental Ministry. I want to know everything about Adamchik's recent activities. As her team worked, Mara studied the timber around the corpse tree. The logs were from old-growth forest. She could tell by the density of the rings. Protected trees. Illegal cuts. Her phone rang. It was Mazur. Mara, the hospital patients. They're getting worse. Sophia tried to put roots down through her bed. Anya broke restraints and made it to the parking lot before security stopped her. She was trying to reach the forest. And Dominic. He paused. Dominic is growing. Literally. He's gained 6 inches in height in the last 2 hours, and his bones are changing. They're becoming more like wood than calcium. Can you stop it? I don't know what it is, Mazur admitted. Every test comes back impossible. Their blood has chlorophyll in it. Chlorophyll. Mara. They're photosynthesizing. This isn't medicine. This is something else, Mara finished. I know. After hanging up, she stood in the logging yard, surrounded by dead trees and one very dead man who'd become a living one, and made her decision. She believed in law. She dedicated her life to it. But maybe there were laws older than the ones in her handbook. That evening, she went back to her grandmother's cottage. I need to talk to it, she said. The Leshy. I need to negotiate. Babsha didn't look surprised. You understand what you're asking? The Leshy's justice is absolute. If it finds you wanting, you won't leave the forest. People are dying. More will die if this continues. I have to try. The old woman studied her granddaughter for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll prepare you. But Mara, when you stand before the Leshy, you stand before the forest itself. You must be honest. You must be respectful. And you must offer something of value. What kind of offering? That depends on what you're asking for. You want the Leshy to show mercy, to release the students, to stop the killings. That's a significant request. It will require a significant sacrifice. My life? Mara asked quietly. Babsha shook her head. The Leshy doesn't need your life, but it might need your service, your promise, your word. I can do that. Can you? The old woman's eyes were sharp. Once given to the forest, a promise can't be broken. Not without consequences you can't imagine. Mara thought of Jakub's body wrapped in vines, of a Domchik transformed into a warning, of 3 students slowly losing their humanity. I can do that, she repeated more firmly. Babsha pulled out the old book and began to teach her granddaughter what had been forgotten. Part 4. Into the Forest. The night before she planned to enter the forest, Mara couldn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, surrounded by case files and her grandmother's books, trying to prepare for a negotiation unlike any she'd ever attempted. How did you bargain with a forest guard? What did you offer something that was older than civilization? Her phone rang. It was Mazur. The students are getting worse, he said without preamble. All 3 of them. Whatever process started during the ritual, it's accelerating. Dominic's skin is developing actual bark plates. Sophia's hair isn't just growing moss anymore. It's becoming moss, transforming at the cellular level. And Anya. What about Anya? She's put down roots. Literal roots, through the hospital bed. We had to cut them to move her, and she screamed like we were cutting off limbs. Mara, if this continues, we're going to lose them. They'll complete the transformation, and then— I'm working on it, Mara interrupted. Working on what? We don't even understand what's happening. The blood tests show chlorophyll. Their cells are developing cellulose walls. They're photosynthesizing. This isn't medicine, it's magic, Mara finished quietly. Silence on the other end of the line. You've gone insane, Mazur said finally. The stress, the impossible circumstances. It's understandable, but Mara, you need to think clearly. I am thinking clearly. Maybe for the first time. Pyotr, these aren't medical cases. They're something else. Something old. And I think I can fix it, but I need time. How much time do they have? Mara looked at the lunar calendar on her grandmother's book. The moon was waning, approaching the dark moon. In traditional folklore, that was a time of endings and transitions. 2 days, she said. Maybe 3. I'll have an answer by then. After hanging up, she returned to her preparations. Her grandmother had given her a list of requirements for approaching the Leshy safely. First, she needed offerings. Not just any offerings, but ones that held meaning. Bread made from grain grown in forest soil. Her grandmother had given her a loaf baked according to the old recipe, each ingredient gathered with proper respect. Salt from the earth, blessed with ancient prayers. And a personal sacrifice, something valuable to her, given freely. Second, she needed protection. Not against the Leshy. You couldn't protect yourself against a forest god, but against the lesser spirits and dangers of the deep woods. Her grandmother had prepared a belt woven from rowan wood and red thread, marked with protective symbols. It wouldn't stop the Leshy if he decided to harm her, but it would keep the smaller threats at bay. Third, and most important, she needed the right words. The old book contained formulas for addressing the Leshy, but they were in archaic Slavic mixed with even older tongues. Mara had spent hours memorizing the pronunciation, the rhythm, the specific cadences that marked respectful supplication rather than demand. Get any of it wrong, and the Leshy might take offense. Get all of it right, and he still might kill her. But doing nothing wasn't an option. Not with 3 people transforming into plants. Not with the spectre of more violence if the forest continued to enforce its laws through transformation and death. Mara thought about her career, about all the cases she'd solved through careful investigation and logical deduction, about the rules of evidence, the procedures of law, the clean structure of modern justice. All of it was about to become irrelevant. She was stepping outside the law she'd sworn to uphold, into a jurisdiction that predated Poland, predated nations, predated humanity itself. A legal system where intent mattered less than action, where punishment was immediate and absolute, where mercy was a negotiation rather than a right. Part of her, the detective, the rational modern woman, wanted to walk away. To call in specialists, blame the transformations on some exotic parasite or industrial toxin, file a report and move on. But another part, the part that carried her great-great-grandmother's blood, knew the truth. The forest was real. The Leshy was real. The old laws were real. And someone had to stand between the ancient powers and the modern world, before the collision destroyed both. At midnight, Mara put on practical clothes, hiking boots, dark jeans, a warm jacket. She braided her hair the way her grandmother had shown her, in a pattern that was itself a prayer for safe passage. She wore the rowan belt and carried a small bag with her offerings. And she carried one more thing, her service weapon. Not that it would do any good against a forest god, but it made her feel slightly less helpless. Slightly more like herself. She drove to her grandmother's cottage. Babsha was awake despite the hour, sitting by a small fire, tending a pot of something that smelled of herbs and darker things. "You're really doing this," the old woman said. "Not a question. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. You could walk away. Let the forest handle its business. Let the victims pay for their violations. They didn't know, Mara protested. They were ignorant, not malicious. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. I know, but there has to be a middle ground. Some kind of compromise between the old justice and modern mercy. Babsha stirred her pot, the firelight making deep shadows on her weathered face. Your great-great-grandmother tried the same thing once. Made a bargain with the forest. Tried to save someone who'd violated the old laws. It cost her dearly. The forest always demands its price. What happened to her? She survived. But she was never the same. The forest marked her, claimed her. She spent the rest of her life serving as its voice, its intermediary. Some called her blessed. Others called her cursed. She herself never said which it was. Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. And you think that's what will happen to me? I think you're walking a path that's been walked before. Whether you come back the same person who left, that's up to you and the forest. The old woman stood, moving to a shelf and pulling down a small wooden box. From it she took a knife, not large but old, the handle carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the firelight. This was hers, your great-great-grandmother's, iron, blessed by a priest who still remembered the old ways. It can cut things that normal blades cannot. Keep it with you. Mara took the knife. It was cold despite being near the fire, and it hummed slightly in her hand, like it held a charge. Thank you, Babsha. Don't thank me yet. You might come back cursing my name for sending you into this. The old woman embraced her granddaughter, held her tight for a long moment. Be smart. Be respectful. And remember, the Leshy isn't evil. It's law. It will be fair, according to its own understanding. That's all you can ask for. Mara left her grandmother's cottage and entered the forest at the traditional crossing point, where a rowan tree stood sentinel. She touched its bark in passing, a gesture of respect, and felt the wood warm under her palm. The forest acknowledged her. Now she just had to survive its judgment. The forest at midnight was a different place. Mara had been here hundreds of times. Daytime patrols, accident scenes, missing person searches. But she'd never been here like this, without a flashlight, without backup, stepping off the marked trails into the true wilderness. The darkness was absolute at first, until her eyes adjusted and she realized it wasn't truly dark. The moon was down, but starlight filtered through the canopy, and there was a phosphorescence to the moss on some trees, a glow to certain mushrooms. The forest had its own light, if you knew how to see it. She walked north, counting paces the way her grandmother had instructed. The forest was silent around her. No birds at this hour, no insects. Just the sound of her breathing and her footsteps on the leaf-littered ground. Then, slowly, she became aware of other sounds. Rustling in the undergrowth. Movement in the branches above. The sense of being watched from dozens of angles at once. The forest was full of eyes. She gripped the rowan belt, feeling its protective power, and kept walking. The spirits could watch. As long as they didn't interfere, she would ignore them. At the 100th pace, she turned east, following a deer trail that was barely visible even with her adjusted vision. The path wound between ancient trees, oaks and ashes and pines that had stood for centuries. Some had marks on them, old blazes, protection symbols, boundaries. This was deep forest, old forest, the kind of place that had never been fully tamed, never been truly controlled. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else. A strange calm, a sense of rightness, like she was finally in a place where she belonged. Maybe her grandmother was right. Maybe this path had always been waiting for her. Maybe her great-great-grandmother's blood called to the forest, recognized it, understood it in ways her conscious mind couldn't. At the 200th pace, the path opened into a small clearing, and there, in the center, stood the grandmother oak. It was massive. Mara had seen it before. Everyone who grew up near the forest had, during sanctioned tours, but never like this. Never at night, when the tree seemed to gather all the darkness around it and hold it close like a cloak. Never alone. The oak was old beyond measure. 800 years, the guide said, but Mara suspected it was older. 1,000 years? More. The trunk was wide enough that 10 people holding hands couldn't circle it. The branches spread like a network of roads, each one thick as a normal tree, and carved into the bark, in letters so worn they were barely visible, were names. Hundreds of names. Thousands. Mara stepped closer, squinting to read them. Some were recent enough to make out. Mara Kowalska, her cousin who drowned, Tekla Kowalska, her great-great-grandmother, names of other villagers who died in the forest over the decades. But most were older, the letters smoothed by time and weather. Names in Polish, in German, in Russian, in languages she didn't recognize. All the people who'd entered this forest and never left. All the ones claimed by the old laws. This was a monument, a memorial, a warning. Mara placed her offerings at the base of the tree, in the hollow between 2 great roots that formed a natural altar. The bread, the salt, the knife she'd carried since childhood, a sacrifice of utility, of protection, of connection to her past life. Then she spoke the words her grandmother had taught her, the old formula in the old tongue. Leshy, pan lasu, strasnik starik drag. Prosycards z prosba. Prosycards z secunkium. Prosycards sukak sproidliwosi. Leshy, Lord of the Forest, guardian of the old ways. I come with a request. I come with respect. I come seeking justice. For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest remained silent, unnaturally so. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even her own breathing seemed to fade, becoming part of the stillness. Then the tree moved. A loaf of bread, baked with herbs according to the old recipe. Salt from the earth, blessed by whispered prayers. A knife she'd owned since childhood, iron and worn with use. And a promise, carried in her heart. The forest at night was a different place. Mara had been here hundreds of times. Daytime patrols, accident scenes, missing person searches. But she'd never been here like this, without a flashlight, without backup, stepping off the marked trails into the true wilderness. The old-growth section of Białowieża was protected for a reason. These trees were ancient beyond measure, oaks that had stood when Poland was still a pagan land, when the forest stretched unbroken from the Baltic to the Black Sea. They'd seen empires rise and fall, and they'd remember when the last human was dust. Mara followed the instructions from her great-great-grandmother's book, north from the village, to where 3 oaks grew in a triangle. Then east, counting exactly 100 paces. Then south, to the oldest tree in the forest, an oak so massive it would take 10 people holding hands to circle it. The grandmother oak. Mara placed her offerings at its base, in the hollow between 2 great roots. Then she spoke the words Babcia had taught her, old words, in an older dialect of Polish mixed with something more ancient. Leshy, pan lasu, strasnik starik drag. Prosycards z prosba. Prosycards z secunkium. Prosycards sukak sproidliwosi. Leshy, Lord of the Forest, guardian of the old ways. I come with a request. I come with respect. I come seeking justice. For a moment, nothing happened. The forest was silent, unnaturally so. No birds, no insects, no wind. Then the tree moved. Not the whole tree, just the bark. It rippled like water, and a face emerged from the wood. An old man's face, with eyes like knotholes and a beard of moss. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the roots beneath her feet and the leaves above her head. Mara Kowalska, I know you. Mara forced herself not to step back. You know me. Your blood is old. Your great-great-grandmother knew the ways. She walked between worlds. You carry her gift, though you have denied it. I'm a police detective. I deal in evidence, in law. Law. The face in the oak smiled, and it was not comforting. Yes. Let us discuss law. The bark rippled again, and suddenly Mara was somewhere else. Still in the forest, but not the forest she knew. This was older, wilder. The trees towered higher, their trunks thicker, their roots forming a network that glowed with faint green light. And standing before her was a figure. He was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in clothes that looked woven from bark and moss. His face was human, but also not, too sharp, too wooden, eyes that held the green of every leaf that ever grew. In one hand he carried a staff made from a living branch, still sprouting leaves. The Leshy. You come seeking mercy for those who violated my laws, he said, and his voice was like wind through branches. Why should I grant it? Mara steadied herself. Because they didn't know. They're young, foolish. They thought the old ways were just stories. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. The Leshy's voice hardened. That is what your courts say, is it not? A criminal cannot claim innocence simply because they did not know their actions were forbidden. Mara felt the trap of her own logic. But human law has proportionality. Punishment should fit the crime. They made a mistake. And Jakub Vrobel asked to understand the forest. I gave him that understanding. He became what he sought to know. Where is the injustice? He's dead. He is transformed. He is part of the forest now. Forever. Is that not immortality? Is that not the ultimate understanding? The Leshy stepped closer, and Mara smelled earth and rain and growing things. You humans claim to love nature, to want to protect it, to understand it. But you want to do so on your terms, from a distance, safely. Jakub asked for true knowledge. I gave it to him. The price is simply higher than he imagined. And the others? Mara challenged. Zofia, Anya, Dominic, what crime did they commit? They participated in the ritual. They made demands of the forest. They must also pay. And Adamczyk? The logger. The Leshy's face darkened, and for a moment Mara saw not a man but a forest in rage, a storm of tooth and claw and crushing root. Pyotr Adamczyk cut down protected trees, old trees, trees under my guardianship. He did so illegally, secretly, for profit. He showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. His punishment was just. By what right? Mara demanded. You're not a judge, not a jury. I am the forest. The Leshy's voice shook the ground beneath her feet. I am the law that existed before your courts, before your cities, before your kind learned to make fire. I am the balance that keeps the world alive. And when that balance is violated, I restore it. He gestured with his staff, and the glowing roots beneath their feet pulsed with light. Mara saw images, memories, perhaps. The forest as it had been, vast and wild. Then the coming of humans, axes, fires, settlements. The forest shrinking, retreating, wounded but enduring. And through it all, the Leshy, watching, waiting, occasionally acting when the violations became too great. "You understand," he said quietly. "I see it in your eyes. You are a detective. You pursue justice. So do I. We are not so different." "But mercy," Mara started. "Mercy is for those who show remorse. Tell me, Mara Kowalska, if the students had survived, if they had escaped the forest's judgment, would they have changed? Would they have respected the old ways? Or would they have dismissed this as a strange experience, a story to tell at parties, before returning to their lives of consumption and carelessness?" Mara thought of Dominic's terror, of his words. "We thought it was just a game." "I don't know," she admitted. "Neither do I. But I know this. The forest has been patient. For centuries, we have watched your kind break every law, violate every boundary, and face no consequences. The time for patience is ending." The glowing roots darkened, and Mara felt something shift in the air. A tension, like a storm about to break. "What are you saying?" The Leshy looked at her with ancient eyes. "The world is out of balance. Your kind has taken too much, destroyed too much, forgotten too much. And now you come to me, asking for mercy for those who violated my laws, while the greater violations continue unchecked." He raised his staff, and the forest around them grew darker. "Unless balance is restored, the forest will restore it itself, and that restoration will not be gentle." Part 5. The Negotiation. Mara felt the weight of his words, felt the truth of them. She'd seen the environmental reports, the climate data, the extinction rates. She knew the world was in crisis. But what could she, one person, do? "I'm just a detective," she said quietly. "I can't fix the world." "No," the Leshy agreed. "But you can fix this. You can restore balance in this place, and perhaps that ripples outward. Perhaps others learn. What do you want from me?" The Leshy studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured with his staff, and the scene changed again. They stood in a clearing, and before them was a vision of the future, or possible futures. In one, Mara saw the forest shrinking, dying, turned into plantations and highways. She saw the Leshy growing angry, his justice becoming harsher, until the killings spread beyond the forest's edge. Saw fear leading to axes and fire, humans trying to destroy what they couldn't control. Saw the forest burning. In another vision, she saw the forest protected, but sterile. Tourists on marked paths, nature reduced to a museum, the old magic fading to nothing. The Leshy becoming a statue, a story, a forgotten god. The balance maintained by glass walls and regulations, not understanding. In the third vision, she saw something different. People living alongside the forest, respecting its laws, remembering the old ways. The Leshy as guardian, not executioner. Humans and nature in conversation, not conflict. "That is the balance I seek," the Leshy said. "Not dominion, not preservation through separation, but coexistence, respect." "How?" Mara asked. "How do I make that happen?" "You are a detective. You enforce law. But you enforce only human law. I propose a partnership." Mara's breath caught. "What kind of partnership?" "You become my representative, the voice of the forest Indiana, the human world. When my laws are violated, you investigate. You judge. You enforce. but you do so with understanding of both worlds. You bridge the gap. And in return, I show mercy to those currently under my judgment. The students will be allowed to transform back, slowly, painfully, but they will remain human. They will remember, though. They will carry the mark of the forest, and they will tell others what they learned. That's all. I become some kind of forest detective, and you release them. The Leshy smiled, and it was sharp. Not quite. There are conditions. Of course there were. You must learn the old ways. Truly learn them. Your grandmother will teach you. You must spend time in the forest, understand it, respect it. You must make offerings and keep the traditions. Mara nodded. She could do that. And, the Leshy continued, when there are violations of forest law, and there will be, you must enforce them. Not with my harshness, perhaps, but with justice. Real justice. Those who harm the forest must face consequences. You will make sure they do. How? I can't just arrest people for cutting down trees. You will find a way. You are clever. Use your human laws when you can. Use my laws when you must. But the important thing is this. Those who violate the forest must know they will be held accountable. It was a strange bargain. Mara would become something between a police detective and a forest guardian, enforcing two sets of laws, walking between two worlds. And if I refuse, she asked, then the students die. Adamchik's fate becomes common, and the forest continues to defend itself the only way it knows how, with absolute justice. More will die, many more, until your kind learns to respect the balance, or until the forest is finally destroyed. Mara thought of her grandmother's words, once given to the forest, a promise can't be broken. She thought of Yakub, wrapped in vines, of Adamchik, turned into a warning, of 3 students transforming into plants. She thought of the ancient forest, vast and patient, and finally losing its patience. I accept, she said. The Leshy extended his hand, wooden fingers, bark skin, but shaped like a human hand. Mara took it. The moment they touched, she felt it, the forest pouring into her, through her, becoming part of her. She gasped as knowledge flooded her mind, every tree in Białowieża, every creature, every plant. She felt their lives, their deaths, their slow, patient growth. She felt the network of roots beneath the earth, the web of connections that linked every living thing. And she felt the Leshy's laws, carved into her bones like runes. Take only what you need. Give back what you take. Respect what you cannot understand. Harm the forest. Face the forest's justice. When the flood of sensation ended, Mara staggered. The Leshy steadied her. You are marked now, he said, and she looked down to see a pattern on her forearm. Something like a tattoo, but alive, shifting, green lines that looked like roots or veins or both. The forest will know you, and you will know the forest. What about the students? The Leshy gestured, and Mara saw another vision. The hospital, the 3 patients. As she watched, the transformations began to reverse. Slowly, painfully, but definitely. The bark receded from Dominic's skin. The moss in Zophia's hair withered and fell away. The flowers on Anya's fingers closed and dropped off. They will heal, the Leshy said, but they will remember, and they will speak of what they saw. Perhaps others will listen. And Adamchik? He violated the law knowingly, repeatedly, without remorse. His punishment stands. He is a warning. The Leshy began to fade, merging back into the trees. Go now, Detective Mara Kowalska. Do your work. Enforce both laws. And remember, the forest is always watching. Part 6. The New Law. Mara woke up at the base of the grandmother oak, the morning sun filtering through the leaves. For a moment, she thought it had been a dream. Then she looked at her arm and saw the mark, green and living, proof that some bargains were real. She gathered the empty offering dishes. The bread and salt had been accepted, and walked back to civilization. At the hospital, Dr. Mazur met her with wide eyes. "Mara, I don't know what happened, but they're recovering. All 3 of them. The transformations are reversing. It's impossible, but it's happening." "That's good news," Mara said calmly. "But how?" "Let's just call it a miracle and be grateful." Over the next week, the students recovered fully, or as fully as they could. Dominic's skin returned to normal, but he still had nightmares of being rooted to the earth. Zophia's hair grew back, but she refused to go near forests or even parks. Anya was discharged, but she moved to Krakow, far from any old-growth woodland. But they talked. They told their story, a story of modern people who'd played with ancient forces and learned that some things shouldn't be treated as games. The story spread online, dismissed by many as urban legend, but believed by enough people that Cupola night celebrations in Białowieża became notably more respectful. Adamczyk's body, or what he'd become, posed a problem. Mara convinced the authorities that it was a crime scene that needed preservation. The tree corpse was cordoned off, studied, eventually declared a bizarre mystery. Environmental groups used it as a symbol. See what happens when you destroy the forest. The universe itself fights back. Logging operations near Białowieża were quietly scaled back. As for Mara, she continued her work as a detective, but with a difference. She became the specialist for crimes involving the forest: poaching, illegal logging, dumping, anything that violated environmental law. And she was good at it. Uncannily good. She always seemed to know where the violations occurred, what evidence to find, how to build an unshakable case. Her success rate was remarkable. Prosecutors loved her. Defense attorneys feared her. And criminals learned that if you broke the law in Białowieża, Detective Kowalska would find you. What they didn't know was that Mara had help. Sometimes, when she walked the forest alone, which she did often now, fulfilling her bargain, she would see things. A fox that watched too intently. An owl that appeared in daytime. An old man on a path that hadn't been there a moment before. The Leshy kept watch. And through their connection, he told her things. Where the illegal loggers worked. Where the poachers set their traps. Where someone had dumped chemicals in a stream. And Mara enforced the law. Both laws. The human law through her police work. The forest law through her presence, her investigations, her refusal to let violations go unpunished. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes the human law was too lenient, a fine when the forest law demanded more. In those cases, Mara did what she could within her authority, and trusted the forest to do the rest. A poacher who got off with probation found his truck wouldn't start near any forest. Every time he approached the woods, mechanical problems. Eventually, he gave up hunting. A developer who bribed his way to a permit found his machinery breaking down in strange ways. Trees fell, but never where they were supposed to. Workers got lost on trails that were clearly marked. The project was abandoned, deemed cursed. Small punishments, compared to what the Leshy could do, but effective. Mara's life changed in other ways too. She studied with her grandmother, learning the old traditions. She made offerings on holy days. She could feel the forest now, its moods, its health. When she walked among the ancient trees, she understood them in a way she never had before. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. If binding herself to the forest, to its law and its guardian, was wisdom or madness. But then she'd think of Jakub, who'd asked to understand and gotten his wish in the worst way. She'd think of how close the forest had come to true rage, to punishments that would have made Adamchik's transformation look merciful. And she'd look at her arm, at the living mark that proved some laws were older than courtrooms and constitutions. She'd made a choice. She'd become a bridge between worlds. And maybe, just maybe, that would help restore the balance. Part 7. The Second Summer. A year passed. Then another. Mara's reputation grew. She became known as the detective who cared about environmental crimes, who actually got results. Other jurisdictions requested her help. She trained other officers, shared her methods, or as much as she could without revealing the truth. Białowieża Forest became a model of conservation. Tourism increased, but it was respectful tourism. Guided walks, educational programs, strict rules about staying on paths and leaving no trace. The local economy benefited. People learned that protecting the forest was good for everyone. Mara's grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving Mara the cottage and all her books. Mara moved in, living on the forest's edge, perfect for her dual role. On Cupola night, 2 years after the incident, Mara stood in the same clearing where she'd met the Leshy. She'd brought offerings, bread and salt and honey, and laid them at the base of the grandmother oak. "I've kept my promise," she said aloud. "The forest is protected. The laws are enforced. Balance is maintained." The bark rippled, and the familiar face emerged. "You have done well, Mara Kowalska. The forest thanks you." "I have a question," Mara said. "How long? How long do I serve? Until you choose to stop, or until you die? Whichever comes first. And if I choose to stop, then another must take your place. The forest needs a voice, a guardian who walks in both worlds." Mara thought about that. She was 42 years old. She might have decades left. Decades of serving the forest, of enforcing its laws, of walking between worlds. "I'll need help," she said. "Eventually. Someone to train, to take over when I can't continue. Then find them. Teach them. The old knowledge should not be lost again." The face began to fade, but Mara called out, "Wait. One more question. Why me? Of all the people you could have chosen, why me?" The Leshy's smile was the last thing to disappear. "Because you understand justice, Mara Kowalska. True justice. Not the kind written in books, but the kind that weighs actions and consequences, that seeks balance rather than revenge. You were always meant for this. Your great-great-grandmother knew. Your grandmother knew. And now you know." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone in the clearing with her offerings and her thoughts. She stayed there for a while, listening to the forest. The birds singing, the wind through leaves, the small sounds of creatures moving through undergrowth. A year ago, it had been noise. Now it was conversation. She could hear the forest breathing. And she realized something. She was happy. Not the simple happiness of her earlier life, when things were clear and defined, but a deeper satisfaction, a sense of purpose. She was protecting something ancient and irreplaceable. She was keeping balance. She was doing work that mattered. As she walked back to her cottage, she thought about finding an apprentice. Someone young, idealistic, who cared about nature and justice. Someone who could learn the old ways and carry them forward. Maybe one of the university students, not the ones who'd been punished, but others studying folklore or environmental science. someone who believed in both knowledge and respect. She'd start looking. The forest would need a new guardian eventually, and Mara would make sure that guardian was ready. Epilogue. 10 years later. Detective Inspector Tomasz Gorski, promoted after Mara retired, stood in the clearing and waited. He'd been Mara's apprentice for 5 years before she'd passed away. 5 years of learning the old ways, of understanding the bargain, of preparing for his role. Now, at 35, he carried the mark on his arm and the responsibility in his heart. "I'm ready," he said to the empty air. The grandmother oak rippled, and a face emerged. But it wasn't the Leshy. It was Mara. Not quite Mara as he'd known her. This version was made of wood and leaf, her eyes green as forest moss, her hair flowing into branches. But it was unmistakably her. "Tomasz," she said, and her voice was wind and water. "You're doing well. The forest approves. You became. When I died, the Leshy asked if I wanted to rest, or if I wanted to continue serving the forest in a new way. I chose to continue." She smiled. "Someone has to keep the old guardian honest. Is this my fate too? When I die? Only if you choose it. The forest offers, it doesn't demand. Not from those who serve willingly." Tomasz touched the mark on his arm. "I'll serve as long as I can, and I'll find someone to follow me. The knowledge won't be lost." "Good," Mara in the tree said. "The world needs those who remember the old laws, who understand that some things are bigger than human ambition, that balance is more important than profit, that the forest, all forests, all wild places, deserve respect and protection." "I understand. I know you do. That's why I chose you." She began to fade back into the wood. "Mara," Tomasz called. "Thank you. For everything." Her voice came from the leaves above. "Serve well, Detective Gorski. The forest is counting on you." And then she was gone, merged back into the ancient oak, becoming part of the network of roots and branches and life that was Białowieża. Tomasz stood alone in the clearing, feeling the weight of his responsibility. A decade had passed since Mara first met the Leshy, since she'd made her bargain. In that time, the forest had become a symbol, not just of conservation, but of a different way of thinking about nature. Other countries were watching now. Representatives from Sweden, Romania, Russia, places with their own ancient forests, had visited Białowieża to learn how Poland was managing the balance between human needs and environmental protection. What they didn't know was that the success had nothing to do with policy or regulations. It had everything to do with an ancient guardian and the humans who'd agreed to serve as its bridge to the modern world. Tomasz had 6 cases active on his desk right now. Illegal mushroom harvesting in the northern sector. Evidence of poachers using electronic calling devices. A developer who'd somehow obtained a permit to build near a protected watershed. 2 instances of off-road vehicles damaging sensitive habitat. And a troubling report of someone trying to organize nighttime pagan experiences in the forest for tourists, commercializing the sacred. Each case would require investigation, judgment, action. Each violator would need to understand that the forest's laws were not suggestions. He'd handled it the way Mara had taught him. Human law first, forest law as necessary. Most people responded to fines, court orders, public shame. They didn't need to meet the Leshy to learn respect. But some did. The poachers, for instance. They'd been warned, fined, had equipment confiscated. They kept coming back, kept killing, kept treating the forest as their private hunting ground. Tomasz had left them an offering at the grandmother oak. A list of names, a description of their crimes, and a request: teach them. The next week, All 3 poachers had disappeared into the forest. Search parties found them 2 days later, alive but changed. They wouldn't speak about what they'd seen, what they'd experienced. But they never hunted in Białowieża again. Never hunted anywhere again, actually. One became a vegetarian. Another started an animal sanctuary. The third had a nervous breakdown whenever he saw a forest, even on television. The LESHY'S lessons were thorough. As Tomasz walked back to his car, he thought about the future. He was 35 now. He'd probably serve for another 30 years, maybe 40 if he was lucky. Eventually, he'd need to find his own successor. He already had someone in mind. A young forestry student named Kasia, studying at the university in Warsaw. She'd grown up in a village near the forest, knew some of the old traditions, and had a fierce dedication to environmental protection. She'd written her undergraduate thesis on integrating traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation science. She didn't know yet that she was being considered, didn't know the truth about the forest, about the leshy, about the bargain. But she would. Soon. The knowledge would continue. The bridge would remain. The balance would hold. Tomasz made his offerings, started his car, and drove back toward the modern world. But part of him stayed in the forest, always. Would stay there forever, just as Mara had. Some bargains lasted a lifetime. Some lasted longer. Coda. The festival. Cupola night. 11 years after the original incident. The forest clearing was filled with people, but not the careless students who'd come before. These were local families, folklorists who'd studied the traditions, environmental activists who understood the deeper meaning of the rituals. They did not demand. They offered. Bread baked with forest herbs. Honey from wild bees. Flowers woven into wreaths that would float down the streams. Songs sung in the old style, thanking the forest for its gifts. Among them, unnoticed, stood a tall figure in peasant clothes, his beard moss-green, his eyes holding depths like ancient wells. The leshy walked among his people, invisible to most, seen clearly by a few. He paused by Kasia, the young woman who would someday wear the mark on her arm. She felt his presence without seeing him, turned toward where he stood, frowned slightly as if trying to remember something important. Not yet, the leshy thought. But soon. Tomasz would approach her within the year. She would be frightened at first, then curious, then committed. She would serve well. He moved on, passing through the crowd like wind through wheat. This was what he'd wanted. Not worship, not fear, just respect, understanding. People who remembered that they were part of nature, not separate from it. Who knew that every action had consequences, every choice mattered. The students who'd performed the unauthorized ritual so long ago had served a purpose, despite, or because of, their punishment. Their story had spread, become legend, reminded people that the old powers were real and demanded respect. Jakub's body had been buried in the forest eventually, after 3 years of transformation. What emerged from his grave was a new oak, young but growing fast, already taller than a human. Sometimes, people said, you could hear it whispering, sharing knowledge, teaching. The 3 survivors had scattered. Dominic taught environmental ethics at a university now, using his experience as a cautionary tale. Zofia worked for Greenpeace, campaigning against deforestation. Anya had left Poland, unable to bear being near forests, but sent money to conservation groups every month. Penance, perhaps, or gratitude for surviving. Even Pyotr Adamczyk had served a purpose. His transformation, documented and studied and ultimately explained away as a bizarre murder by person or persons unknown, had become a warning. Other illegal loggers had seen the photos, heard the stories. Cutting in Białowieża dropped to almost nothing. The official investigation had concluded with no arrests, no convictions, no closure. But in another sense, justice had been absolutely served. The Leshy reached the edge of the gathering and paused, looking back. Tomasz was there, making offerings with the others, his young daughter beside him. The child was 7 years old, already showing signs of the gift. She could see the forest spirits, the small ones, the mouse spirits and bird souls, the dryads of young trees. Perhaps she would be the next guardian, after Kasia. Or perhaps her own child, generation after generation, keeping the knowledge alive. The Leshy smiled, an expression that would have terrified anyone who saw it clearly. His forest was safe. Not forever. Nothing was forever except the earth itself and the laws that governed life and death. But for now, for this moment, there was balance. He turned and walked into the trees, his form shifting as he went. Man became wolf, wolf became tree, tree became wind. The Leshy was all things of the forest and none of them, everywhere and nowhere. The people in the clearing continued their celebration, unaware that their guardian had walked among them, unaware that every word they spoke, every offering they made, every moment of respect they showed, all of it mattered. All of it was seen. All of it would be remembered when the time came to judge. Because the forest never forgot, and the Leshy never slept. And then she was gone, merged back into the ancient oak, becoming part of the network of roots and branches and life that was Białowieża. Tomasz made his offerings and walked back to his car. He had work to do. Reports of illegal hunting in the northern sector, possible pollution in one of the streams, violations of the law, both laws. He would investigate. He would find the truth. He would enforce justice. Because some laws were older than courts and badges. Some laws were carved into the bones of the world. And someone had to remember them. Someone had to stand between the forest and those who would harm it. Someone had to be the bridge. As he drove away, a fox watched from the tree line. Its eyes were too intelligent, too knowing. The Leshy was always watching. And the forest remembered everything. The end. Author's note. This story draws on authentic Eastern European folklore, particularly the legend of the Leshy, in Russian, Lesy in Polish, in Ukrainian, a Slavic forest guardian spirit found throughout Polish, Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian mythology. The Leshy is neither good nor evil, but serves as the embodiment of the forest's will, protecting it from harm and punishing those who disrespect it. Białowieża Forest is real, one of the last remaining primeval forests in Europe, straddling the border between Poland and Belarus. It's home to ancient oaks over 500 years old and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Kupola Night, Nocy Kupoli, is a real Slavic festival celebrating the summer solstice, traditionally marked by jumping over bonfires, releasing flower wreaths on rivers, and various rituals meant to connect with nature and the old gods. The concept of the septucha, whisperer, is also rooted in Polish folk tradition. These were village healers and wise women who knew herbs, charms, and the old magic. While the specific events in this story are fictional, they're built on a foundation of genuine folklore and real places, exploring the tension between modern life and ancient traditions, between human law and natural law, and asking what we owe to the wild places that existed long before us and will hopefully exist long after.